Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode on Mad Schedules podcast. My name is Minerva Goree, and today we will be talking about the generally accepted scheduling principles, better known as GASP or GASP. You can find standalone documents out there with the generally accepted scheduling principles, but it is more easily found within the Planning and Scheduling Excellence Guide, better known as PASEG or PASEG, in Section 2 of the document. Before we get started, I just want to tell you that it's okay if you don't understand everything all at once on this episode. If you are at home or in the office, it may help to open up the document and follow along. But if you are doing something else like listening in the car or in the gym, don't worry about the document. Just listen and internalize these scheduling best practices. You can always listen to the recording as often as you like to keep learning. These are important principles to learn, but don't feel overwhelmed by them. The main point is that now you know these scheduling principles exist, so implementing them one at a time is the best way to go. You may find that as we go through each of the principles, maybe your organization is already using a lot of them, which is awesome. As scheduling practices mature at your organization, you will see more and more of these generally accepted scheduling principles being used. So now let's take a deep breath. Relax and let's have fun with this. First, I want you to know that I will have the links to the PASEG and the generally accepted scheduling principles documents in the description so you can easily access these valuable documents. Also, I want to mention that a lot of words, phrases, and concepts I use here I got directly from these documents, so the credit goes to everyone who created these documents. I'm just bringing these concepts to you in a way that may be easier to understand, or at least that's the plan. Also, anytime I refer to a scheduler or a project scheduler, I am referring to the person who may have created the schedule and who may manage the changes and statusing of the schedule. This can be a project manager, a project analyst, or a project scheduler. But here, anyone who manages the project schedule is the scheduler I'm referring to, no matter their official job title. We will talk about who wrote these principles and why. This is important because we always want to give credit to the creators of these ideas. Then we will talk about the 8 principles that make up the generally accepted scheduling principles. And lastly, we will talk a little bit about recommended use of these principles. Let's first talk about who wrote these principles and why. The generally accepted scheduling principles were originally developed by a committee in the National Defense Industrial Association called Program Planning and Scheduling Subcommittee, or PPSS. The PPSS was a subcommittee formed by the Industrial Committee on Program Management, ICPM, working group in the National Defense Industrial Association, or NDIA. The generally accepted scheduling principles were developed in collaboration with both government and industry. This is very important to know because this means that this group of people got together in a committee and put all these ideas, and these ideas came from both the government, from the contractors to the government, and from people working in commercial endeavors like everyday companies. Okay? That means that these are good scheduling practices that came from many, many experts in this area. So the generally accepted scheduling principles consist of 8 main principles for building, maintaining, and using schedules as effective management tools. The first 5 out of 8 generally accepted scheduling principles describe the required qualities of a valid schedule. This means that the schedule should provide complete, reasonable, and credible information based on realistic logic. This means predecessors and successors, durations, and dates. The last 3 out of 8 generally accepted scheduling principles reflect increased scheduling maturity that creates an effective schedule which provides timely and reliable data. It also aligns time-based resources and is built and maintained by using controlled and repeatable processes. That means that by the time you have achieved all 8 principles, you should have a system of steps in your organization to be able to be repeated by any new scheduler or project team to create an effective schedule. The cool thing about these 8 principles is that they are high-level targets for sound scheduling. This also helps us and our teams understand how mature our schedules are within our organization, and it gives us areas where we may need to improve. If we achieve all 8 principles in our schedules, we are assuring ourselves, our team, and our customers that our integrated master schedules, or IMS, are healthy and fit. A fit IMS is robust and dynamic. Therefore, if we make any changes to our schedules, they will react and change any part that is impacted by this change, giving us schedules we can trust to forecast work. This is because it will show realistic progress as we status it and realistic forecast against resource-loaded performance measurement baseline. So achieving all 8 principles demonstrates that the project team creates and maintains schedules with discipline. This means the IMS has meaningful data that can be used as a meaningful project management tool from start to finish. So by this point, you might be asking, okay, what are these 8 principles? Tell me more about them. So let's get to that. So what is the first principle? The first principle is that a schedule should be complete. This means that the schedule captures the entire discrete authorized project effort from start to finish. So everything that is in scope in the contract or agreement of the project effort. Only authorized scope of the contract, as I already mentioned, should be in your schedule. There shouldn't be any extras that have not been agreed to by a contract. Subcontracted or external work should be part of the schedule. The work should be organized in such a way that it is easy to recognize external work. So anything that is subcontracted or that is being done outside of the organization. Also, it should be clear the level of effort or LOE tasks do not have to be in the integrated master schedule or IMS. They can be in there, but they do not need to be in there. It's not a requirement. Once your schedule meets this requirement of having all work from start to finish represented in your schedule in discrete tasks, then you can say that you have met the first generally accepted scheduling principle. So probably many of you recognize that you already have this in your schedules, which is really awesome. But if you find that when you understand this principle that you do not build schedules this way, then maybe the first step is for you to go look at your schedules and try to implement that first. Okay? So now we move on to the second principle. The second principle is that the schedule should be traceable. This means that the schedule is logically integrated both horizontally and vertically with cross-reference to key documents and tools. So what does this mean exactly, you may be asking yourself? This means that you have added predecessors and successors that make sense in the schedule. So don't just add predecessors and successors just to say that you have them in there. They have to make sense and they have to be very logically picked so that each task flows exactly how you are modeling it of your project for project execution. You should have a clear starting task and finish task in the schedule. Remember, the starting task will never have a predecessor and the finished task will never have a successor. And that is fine, we understand that. But everything else in between should have both a predecessor and successor to be traceable. If you aren't driving to an event or delivery to finish the project, then the schedule is not complete and traceable. Make sure that your schedule captures and integrates the likely and realistic sequence for project execution. Remember, scheduling is both an art and a science. For example, if you give a project plan to any group of schedulers, and you will get different interpretations of how the schedule should be developed and organized. And that's okay. It's okay to have different approaches. As long as the schedule has all the important information, follow schedule best practices as we're learning here, and is complete and traceable. To be traceable means that the schedule is coded in a certain way that can relate tasks and milestones to project documents, tools, and responsible groups, teams, or organizations. So think about it. Are your schedules right now both complete and traceable? What can you do today to start getting there if you're not there yet? How can you help other schedulers or team members understand the importance of these two principles? Take a moment to think about it. Believe me, if you implement these two first principles, you will see a great difference in how your projects perform in a positive way. It does not mean that all your project problems or opportunities will go away. It means that you may be able to use your project schedules to forecast issues way in advance, that you can start forming and implementing a plan to solve the issues before they become a problem. Now let's move on to the third principle. The third principle is the schedule is transparent. That means that the schedule is transparent so everyone who takes a look at the schedule can clearly see that it is complete and traceable. Any assumptions made while creating the schedule should be clearly documented. The program schedule should clearly show the current status and the projected forecast dates. So what does this mean? It means that the schedule has well-documented ground rules, assumptions, and methods of statusing and maintaining schedules. Examples of this is maintaining a documented business rhythm and process and procedure documents used. In these documents, it should show clear steps on how to do schedule analysis, such as checking on schedule health, tracing the critical paths, how risk and opportunities are incorporated into the schedule, and generating performance metrics. If you don't currently use a process document, well, the PASEG is a good place to start. Remember, the PASEG is the Planning and Scheduling Excellence Guide, where we find the generally accepted scheduling principles. It isn't meant to be used as is for all projects and programs. You can modify it to suit your organization and your team's needs. It clearly says in the document you can use it and modify it as long as you leave in and give credit to the group that created this document. As for procedure documents, you can start simply by writing steps for important aspects of scheduling in your organization. Then over time, you can develop and expand these documents. You will have to set a standard of what tools you will use to analyze schedule health and performance metrics. There are many tools out there, but one easy to use that I've used in the past is for Project Schedule Analyzer. It definitely checks for the DCMA 14 points. Plus, it also has been updated to have many other checks that fit into the EVAS and DECM or EVAS and DECA metrics for earned value. If you don't understand what these are, don't worry. Earned value is a more rigorous way of managing cost and schedule. Usually these are U.S. government requirements on their contractors. You may also need to have a schedule risk tool to perform schedule risk assessments or SRAs. These are also used a lot with government contracts, but they are great tools to forecast if your schedule is feasible. Some of these tools for schedule risk assessments could be risky project, at risk, things like that. There's many risk tools out there, but those two are some of the main ones that I have used in the past. And they're relatively easy to use, especially a risky project. But anyway, let's go on to our next principle. So far, we have touched upon 3 principles which our schedule should be: complete, traceable, and transparent. Now we continue with the 4th principle, which is schedule should be status. This means that the schedule has accurate progress through the status date. How often do you update your schedules? Most organizations that have schedulers usually status their schedules on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Sometimes they do it monthly, but it is important to do very frequent updates. Even if the government contract only requires a monthly submittal, it is important to have frequent updates to all schedules, no matter how small or how large the projects or programs. If you use Microsoft Project, do you set the status date first before you start putting in your dates? Do you use the actual start and actual finish columns to put in the real start and finish dates when work actually happened? Answers to these questions are important to see if the schedules are updated and properly statused in a timely manner. This means you update the schedule with complete work, percent complete, and task progress. This also means that the remaining duration of tasks are achievable relative to the status date. And importantly, it is imperative that the task logic, such as predecessors and successors, are accurately maintained. It is not about adding predecessors once and left alone for the rest of the project execution. Task network logic needs to be constantly updated to make sure that it reflects project execution reality. Once we have that, we can move on to our 5th principle, which is predictive. This means that the schedule provides meaningful critical path and accurate forecast for remaining work through program completion. This means that the schedule accurately forecasts the most likely completion dates and impacts to the project baseline. Therefore, you must have baselined your project at the beginning of execution so that we can clearly see where we are at now and what the project baseline says we should be at. This should all be predicted through a valid network logic of predecessors and successors, task duration from status date through project completion. These first 5 principles where a schedule should be complete, traceable, transparent, status, and predictive means that when you achieve them all, then your schedule is valid and healthy. If you have achieved these first 5 principles on your schedule, congratulations! If not, don't worry about it. Follow these principles step by step and you will get there. Now let's explore the last 3 principles that make your schedule effective. Let's talk about how a schedule needs to be usable. This means that the schedule is an indispensable tool for timely and effective management decisions and actions. You know that your schedule is usable when you have the project manager and project team asking to see and analyze the schedule to make project decisions. You know that your schedule is trusted when upper management relies on your schedule reports and analysis to make program decisions at a higher level in the organization or company. A schedule that meets the principle of being usable produces meaningful metrics for timely and effective communication. It also has timely statusing and helps improve project performance and helps mitigate any issues and risks. It's also really helpful in identifying opportunities. Usable schedules are schedules that have been developed and maintained at a right size, not too big or too small, in accordance with the project and are only as complex as necessary. When they meet this criteria, then the schedules can be used to enable effective decision making from all stakeholders. All right, we are making progress and are almost done discussing all the generally accepted scheduling principles. Thank you for joining me in this discussion. We are now on number 7, which is where a schedule is resourced. This does not necessarily mean that the schedule itself is resource loaded, but that somehow cost and schedule data are integrated for internal and external reporting. Therefore, resources align with the schedule baseline and forecast to enable stakeholders to view and assess the time, phase, labor, and other costs required to achieve project baseline and forecast targets. You may be thinking that your project is different from any others, but that only means that you may resource load your schedule at different levels that make sense to your project. It doesn't mean that you skip the resource loading, whether it's within the schedule or in another tool that you do cost and schedule integration. If using Microsoft Project, you will need to be careful about resource loading at the summary task level because the task type for summary task is fixed duration. That means that as duration changes at this level, the work for assigned resources will be changed every time the duration of the summary task changes, which usually means all the time. So just keep that in mind because it may drive you insane. I've known many project schedulers and project managers scratch their head as to why this happens, and it's hard to trace if you don't know the tool inside and out. So, I will give you a recommendation of always resource loading at the task level or discrete task level, never at the summary task level if you're going to be updating and statusing your schedule. When resource loaded schedules are used They enable flexible updates to resource requirements as conditions change. Let's move on to the last principle, number 8. The last principle we will talk about is that the schedule needs to be controlled. This means that the schedule is developed, baselined, and maintained using a stable, repeatable, and documented process. If schedules need to be modified to add, delete, or update the task, then it will follow a process and result in valid and accurate results for sound scheduling, configuration, control, and maintenance. Are your schedules controlled? Do you have a stable, repeatable, and document process to creating, baselining, and maintaining your schedules? Once these 8 principles are successfully applied to all your schedules, we can say that we are completely following the 8 generally accepted scheduling principles. This will ensure that you have robust and dynamic schedules that can be trusted by all stakeholders and used to make important project and program decisions. Now that we have touched upon all 8 principles, we need to talk about recommended use. So how can you use these 8 principles in action? You can use these principles to make sure that when you are trying to add new scheduling processes, techniques, or tools that may comply with these principles, you can also use them to make sure that any training, scheduling reporting, and analysis, and writing any type of documentation fits within these principles. These principles were used to create the document Planning and Scheduling Excellence Guide. It's the overarching principles used in this document. Always remember to stay flexible when using these principles. They should be used to improve project management and not to be used rigidly. We always strive to use these principles and scheduling best practices as they make sense to our organization and the level of scheduling maturity we are currently at. To recap, we talked about the 8 principles that are part of the generally accepted scheduling principles. These include when a schedule is 1. Complete, 2. Traceable, 3. Transparent, 4. Statist, 5. Predictive, 6. Usable, 7. Resourced, and 8. Controlled. Hopefully you don't feel too overwhelmed with all of this information. You just need to take one step at a time. Read and review the Planning and Scheduling Excellence Guide Section 2, where you will find all of the generally accepted scheduling principles. I would also recommend implementing one concept at a time, starting from number 1 and going up to number 8, not in any other sequence. Once you do this one at a time, it should all come together to give you robust schedules that you and your whole team can trust. In the next episodes here at madschedules, I will be going over each of the sections in the Planning and Scheduling Excellence Guide in depth so we can discuss what it all means. This means that it will also show how these concepts that we learned today are used within the rest of the document. So see you next time. I am your host, Minerva Goree. Bye.